The smell of my burned daughter's teddy bear still clung to my robes when Constance Whitmore walked into my courtroom like she owned it. That same psychotic smile. The one she'd worn while poisoning my dead wife's roses with bleach. The one she'd flashed while stealing $89,000 from our neighbors. The one she'd probably had when she watched my house and everything I had left of my family burn to ash. But this HOA terrorist made one fatal error. She never bothered learning who she was destroying. I'm not just some random single dad she could bully into submission. I'm Federal Judge Thaddeus Morrison. And she just committed arson against the one man in this district with the legal power to annihilate her existence. 18 months of psychological warfare. One moment of beautiful reckoning. She thought burning my house would silence me. Instead, she just handed me the match to torch her entire criminal empire. The courtroom smelled faintly of antiseptic and old oak polish, but in my head, all I could smell was smoke. Every time the AC hissed, I heard the hiss of burning timber. Every shuffle of paper sounded like crackling wood. She sat at the defense table, her pearl earrings catching the morning light like tiny suns. Calm. Too calm. She didn't see the ghost standing behind me, Zara, 12 years old, her curls tied back with the same blue ribbon I'd pulled from the ashes. She didn't see the tremor in my hand when I picked up her case file. To everyone else, I looked composed, the federal judge ready to deliver impartial justice. But inside me, a storm had been building for 2 years. 2 years ago, my world was still intact. I was Thaddeus Morrison, federal prosecutor, proud father, and husband of the late Sarah Morrison, the only woman who could make me laugh after 12-hour hearings. My daughter Zara was the heartbeat of my home. Every morning, she'd drag me out to the yard before school to race to the mailbox. Loser had to pack lunch. I always lost on purpose. We lived in a modest craftsman home in Willowbrook Heights, one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where everyone smiled too long and mowed their lawns twice a week. The kind of place where secrets hid behind fresh paint. I joined the HOA to keep busy after Sarah died. That's when I met her. Constance Whitmore. President of the Homeowners Association. Perfect posture, pastel sweaters, and a voice dipped in venom. She introduced herself with a smile so polished it could cut glass. "We're so glad to have a man of law here, Judge Morrison," she'd said that day. "We like to keep things orderly." At first, it was small things. A fine for unauthorized paint color. A warning for improperly trimmed hedges. I ignored them, thinking she was just another overzealous HOA president. But then came the notices for nuisance behavior, my daughter laughing too loud on her tire swing. Then someone smashed our mailbox. A week later, bleach was poured into Sarah's rose garden. I reported it to the HOA board. They shrugged. "Constance handles all enforcement," one member said, avoiding eye contact. That's when I realized, this wasn't about rules. This was control. And she'd picked me as her next target. The night of the fire, the air was sharp and cold. Zara and I had just finished watching an old Disney movie when I smelled smoke, faint at first, like burnt toast. Then stronger. Acrid. I ran outside barefoot, and the front porch was already glowing orange. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the entire front of the house was an inferno. I remember holding Zara back as the flames swallowed her room, her screams piercing the night. Neighbors stood across the street, silent, phones out, faces blank. And in the crowd, I saw her. Constance. Watching. Smiling. When it was over, the house was gone. The roses, gone. The laughter, gone. All that remained was the melted frame of Zara's teddy bear and the faint stench of gasoline the investigators, somehow, didn't find conclusive. That night, sitting on the curb in nothing but ash and grief, I made a promise. If justice had a face, it would look like mine. And if vengeance had a name, it would be hers. Morning sunlight dripped through the blinds of my temporary apartment like golden knives, cutting through the silence. I hadn't slept in months. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, Constance Whitmore's smile, glowing behind the fire. Her name burned in my brain like smoke trapped in a closed room. They called it an accident. Faulty wiring. That's what the insurance report said. That's what the local fire department wrote. But I'd prosecuted enough arson cases to smell lies through the soot. There was nothing accidental about the gasoline patterns found in my kitchen. And there was nothing accidental about the HOA's maintenance inspection the day before the fire. But she was careful. Too careful. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Just whispers. A neighbor's fence camera had mysteriously gone missing that week. The HOA's surveillance system malfunctioned. Even the landscaper who'd seen a black SUV near my house that night had suddenly moved out, no forwarding address. For the first few months, I was a ghost moving through my own life. Court, case files, depositions, all just noise. Until one night, as I was sorting through the box of what was left of my house, I found something. A letter. Tucked behind a warped photo frame. Notice of violation, unkempt property, Section 4B. Immediate fine, $2,000. Issued by C. Whitmore. It was dated the morning before the fire. That was the crack in her mask I needed. I started digging. Quietly. Carefully. Using contacts I'd built over 15 years in the federal system. And what I found didn't just smell of corruption, it reeked of rot. Constance had turned the Willowbrook HOA into her own private empire. Fines, maintenance fees, and special assessments, all funneled into 3 shell companies registered under her maiden name, C. Layton. She wasn't just robbing homeowners. She was laundering hundreds of thousands of dollars. But money wasn't her addiction. Control was. Every neighbor I spoke to had a story, a threat, a fine, a fear. Mr. Patel, who'd lost his business after she reported him for unapproved home operations. The Millers, whose child's wheelchair ramp she had removed because it violated neighborhood aesthetics. And Mrs. Lucy, the one with the cat who used to steal newspapers, she'd whispered, "Don't cross her, Thad. People who cross her, disappear." By the time I pieced it all together, I realized something darker. The HOA wasn't just her playground. It was her recruitment ground. She'd filled the board with people she could manipulate. Her treasurer. Her cousin. Her secretary. A real estate agent who flipped foreclosed houses the HOA seized. She was running a small-town dictatorship disguised as suburban order. I filed anonymous complaints. Sent evidence to state investigators. Nothing. It all vanished into bureaucratic quicksand. That's when I knew, she had people in her pocket. Local police, county fire marshal, maybe even city officials. She'd built her protection the same way she built her empire, brick by brick, lie by lie. Then, one evening, as I returned to my car after a late hearing, I noticed something off. A small folded paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Just one sentence, written in neat cursive. "Drop it, Judge. Or next time, we burn what's left." That's when fear turned to something else, calculation. I began moving differently. Changed my routes. Stopped speaking to neighbors. Bought burner phones. Used VPNs. If she wanted war, she picked the wrong man. Because I didn't just know how to fight within the law, I wrote it. Over the next few months, I traced one of her shell companies to a fake HOA renovation fund. It led straight to an offshore account in Belize. That's when I contacted an old colleague, Special Agent Marcus Reed, FBI White Collar Crimes Division. He didn't believe me at first. An HOA president? Really, Thad? I slid the evidence folder across the table, bank statements, fake invoices, burner numbers, offshore wire transfers. By the time he finished reading, his face had turned pale. "This isn't just fraud," he muttered. "This is racketeering." And that's when I smiled for the first time in months. Because finally, after losing everything, I had a weapon. But even then, I underestimated her. Because Constance wasn't going to wait to be cornered. She'd built an empire on fear, and she wasn't about to let a grieving father destroy it. The next night, as I drove home, my phone lit up with a single notification from an unknown number. A video. It opened to footage of Zara's old schoolyard, and a woman's voice whispering through static. "You're not the only one who knows how to play games, Judge." I slammed on the brakes. The screen froze, on a single frame. Constance. Waving. The night that video arrived, something inside me snapped, quietly, like a bone breaking under a smile. I stared at her frozen image on the phone screen for what felt like hours. That smug wave, that knowing look. She wasn't just threatening me, she was inviting me to play. Fine. Game on. The next morning, I showed the footage to Marcus. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You realize she's baiting you, right? She wants you to lose control." "I already did," I said flatly. "Now I'm just taking aim." We couldn't prove she'd sent it, burner number, VPN rerouted through 4 states, no metadata. But it didn't matter. I didn't need the message to be admissible. I needed it to be motivation. From that day, I made her life my case. Every hearing, every recess, every sleepless night, I was digging. Through public records, HOA emails, digital footprints she thought she'd erased. I learned her patterns. Thursdays were her HOA inspection rounds, Fridays were her board brunches, which were actually strategy meetings at a real estate firm she secretly co-owned. I started sending anonymous tips to homeowners, small nudges that made them start questioning her authority. Mysteriously, people began refusing to pay fines. A local journalist got wind of corruption rumors. The board started fracturing. And Constance? She noticed. I came home one evening to find a dead crow hanging from my doorknob. A neat little reminder that she still owned the shadows around me. The police called it a juvenile prank. Marcus called it escalation. I called it progress. Because if she was getting sloppy, it meant she was getting scared. 2 weeks later, the HOA called an emergency neighborhood meeting. I attended. She didn't expect me to. The room went dead silent when I walked in, every fake smile freezing mid-lip. Constance stood at the podium in her pink cardigan and pearls, voice syrup sweet. "Well, look who decided to rejoin the community," she said. "Just wanted to see how democracy's holding up," I replied. She grinned. "We're doing quite well. Though some of us have been spreading dangerous lies about our lovely association." I folded my arms. "You mean the kind of lies that show up in federal audits?" Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. That was my win. After the meeting, she cornered me in the parking lot. "You think your badge makes you untouchable," she hissed, dropping the sweet act. "No," I said, stepping closer. "But your fear makes you predictable." Her jaw clenched. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do," I whispered. "A woman about to lose everything." For a split second, her mask cracked. I saw it, the panic beneath the power. Then she smiled again, that same chilling curve of her lips. "Careful, Judge," she murmured. "Fire spreads both ways." The next morning, my car alarm blared at 5 a.m. Windows shattered. Tires slashed. On my windshield, another note. "This neighborhood belongs to me." Marcus pushed for a protection detail. I refused. I wasn't going to let her think I was afraid. Instead, I doubled down. We got a warrant to dig into her financials. The FBI traced a string of false maintenance contracts paid to a non-existent landscaping company. The money led to a hidden property deed, a storage unit outside the city limits. When we opened it, the air was heavy with mold and secrets. Inside were dozens of HOA files, confiscated homeowner documents, fake violation forms, old letters. But tucked in one corner, beneath a tarp, was something that made my throat close. A half-burned metal box. My metal box. Inside, photos. My family photos. Ones that had supposedly burned in the fire. Marcus looked at me. She kept souvenirs. That was it. The final thread snapped. I didn't go home that night. I drove straight to her mansion, that oversized shrine to herself perched on a hill above the rest of the neighborhood. Lights blazed inside. I parked a block away, watching. 2 SUVs in the driveway. A third idling at the gate. She was meeting someone. Through binoculars, I saw a man hand her a folder, thick, sealed, marked with federal insignia. My insignia. She'd gotten hold of my sealed complaint file. That meant someone inside the system was leaking to her. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. For the first time in years, I felt something old crawl back into me, not just anger, but vengeance. The kind that burns cold. That night, as the mansion lights went out one by one, I made another promise to myself. I wasn't going to wait for justice. I was going to become it. The first domino fell at dawn. Marcus called at 4:17 with the voice of a man who'd finally stopped pretending he cared about quiet investigations, urgent, raw. "We've got a wire," he said. "Offshore intermediary to a holding company in Miami. It clears through 3 shell accounts, then lands in real estate purchases under her cousin's name. We can trace it back to Constance." I felt my chest go cold and hot at once, like standing too close to a furnace. This was the break we'd been starving for. We moved fast. No press releases, no heroic headlines. Just sealed warrants, midnight subpoenas, and men and women in plain clothes who smelled like coffee and quiet fury. Marcus assembled a small, surgical team, 2 cyber agents, a forensic accountant, and an agent from the fire marshal's office with soot under his nails and a look that meant he'd seen one too many staged accidents. We started tightening the net. The accountant followed the money trail obsessively, every fake invoice, every supposed landscaping contract that paid out to a numbered company. The cyber guys found burner phones tied to the HOA email server and, astonishingly, a folder of deleted video files hidden inside a realtor's cloud storage. The videos were petty extortion, threats caught on doorbell cams, and one smoking gun clip, a nighttime recording from a contractor's van that showed a figure in a pink cardigan near my porch, pouring a liquid into a vent while humming softly to herself. The face was obscured, but the cardigan, the same pastel knit she favored, was unmistakable. We staked out properties, intercepted meetings, and watched as Constance shuffled funds like a magician shuffles cards. Each discovery was a cold, meticulous revenge, paperwork that turned into warrants, warrants that turned into seizures, seizures that turned into subpoenas. We froze bank accounts. We seized properties. We quietly offered immunity to a landscaper who'd been terrified into silence until now. His testimony read like a confession the size of a mortgage. He described deliveries at odd hours, envelopes passed in cul-de-sacs, and the hollow look on Constance's face when she counted cash in the dark. She fought back, obviously. She leaned on the very thing she'd weaponized for years, community theater. She went on television with a practiced tear, the kind that was perfectly lit and perfectly timed. She cried about smears and vindictive neighbors, and for a week, people who once hunched under her rule began to wobble. The local police captain, a man we'd quietly nudged with evidence of his quiet favors to her businesses, suddenly found new paperwork in his files that made no sense. He resigned. The county fire marshal took a medical leave. It was the smell of smoke after a long fire, the hush that comes before an ember is finally discovered. But the most satisfying moment arrived in a dingy storage unit 3 towns over, under fluorescent buzzers and the smell of old cardboard. We found ledgers, meticulous, handwritten journals with dates, amounts, and initials. CW appeared like a signature etched into a ledger of sin. The journals named people, they named accounts, and, heartbreakingly, they contained a line I'd been searching for like a compass needle pointing north, M/M Morrison, settle/insurance, 9/12. That entry was the rope we needed to climb back to justice. We matched it with surveillance, with the landscaper's testimony, with the video clip and the shell company paper trail. The racketeering case bloomed into existence, RICO charges, wire fraud, arson conspiracy. It was large enough to bring in federal prosecutors from another district so there wouldn't be whispers about conflicts. When the indictment was unsealed, Constance's empire snapped like a rotten branch. For the first time in public, the people she'd terrified leaned forward with something like relief. Neighbors who'd once whispered her praises now whispered other things, apologies, admissions, names. We didn't parade the evidence in the press. We let it work, carefully, legally, beautifully. On the morning of her arrest, I watched from the steps of a courthouse I'd frequented for years as agents in black suits led her out in handcuffs. She didn't struggle. Her smile was still there, that same shard of moonlight, but it trembled at the edges. She kept looking at me, as if daring me to step closer. I didn't. I had to keep distance. Rules and reasons, no matter how much blood they cut. Because the law was no longer just a tool. It had become a blade I'd honed with every quiet night of grief and every meticulous hour of work. I'd turned my loss into evidence, my mourning into motion. The question that kept me awake wasn't whether she'd be convicted, it was whether the sentence could stitch the hole in my chest back together. We had her indicted on multiple counts. The headlines the next day whispered HOA scandal across the city. But the important part was quieter. The neighbors who'd once paid fines without a whisper now showed up in federal court as witnesses. They'd chosen truth over fear. And for the first time since the fire, I felt something like a future press itself against my ribs. The war wasn't over. Trials are battlegrounds with rules and surprises. But the first phase had been won. And the victory tasted, unexpectedly, like ash and iron, but also, faintly, like the possibility of rain. Courtroom mornings are rituals of light and shadow. Files in neat stacks. Gavels echo. The careful shuffle of lawyers who've practiced polite cruelty for decades. Constance arrived like a manufactured storm, hair perfect, lipstick exact, pearls glinting like little accusations. She had the look of someone who's always been on stage, the audience just hadn't known the script. We had a pool of witnesses who had once bowed to her will. They walked into that courtroom with trembling hands and hardened voices. Mr. Patel, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, described the fine that bankrupted his dream. The landscaper testified with shame turned to steel, admitting how fear had kept him quiet, until the night he saw smoke on my porch and couldn't look away. Mrs. Lucy, who used to whisper warnings over hedges, read aloud a letter Constance had forced her to sign, a voluntary waiver that was in fact a threat. Each testimony was a stitch in the tapestry of guilt. The defense tried everything. They painted Constance as a devoted community leader, misrepresented accounting entries as clerical errors, and blamed rogue actors. They tried to make the ledger entries look like coincidences, dates and names mistaken in the shuffle of bureaucracy. But the ledger wasn't paper alone, it was corroboration. Wire transfers matched invoices, burner phones pinged the same towers, surveillance showed her car at odd hours. The prosecutor we'd pulled in read the evidence like scripture. When the arson investigator took the stand, the bar felt thin as a razor. He spoke about accelerants, about burn patterns that didn't resemble faulty wiring but the deliberate choreography of a man or woman who wanted to ensure a house wouldn't survive. He described how gasoline behaves in a kitchen, how it climbs and compels. It was technical and terrible, each word a nail. Zara sat behind me, small and composed in a way that was both unnatural and brave. Her knuckles were white around a folded note she had brought. She'd written it the night the house burned and kept it like a talisman. Then came the moment that the courtroom would carry into memory. The prosecutor pulled out a photograph, a single frame of a shredded, discolored teddy bear with one glass eye gone and thread hanging like confessions. The camera panned to me as the room inhaled. Constance's face, which had been a practiced mask of concern, crumpled in a way no TV makeup could hide. She looked at the photograph as if seeing what she had done for the first time. "You realize," the prosecutor said quietly, "that this teddy belonged to Mr. Morrison's daughter?" The question hovered like a verdict. Constance's mouth opened, no sound came. Her defense tried an insanity claim, then a plea of diminished responsibility. But the ledger, the wire transfers, the videos, the witnesses, they formed a lattice too tight to escape. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Hours that felt like weeks to me, to Zara, to the neighbors who had suffered under the weight of her rule. When the foreperson returned, their face was unreadable for half a heartbeat. Then the word came, guilty. Racketeering. Wire fraud. Arson conspiracy. The gavel of truth struck like lightning in a storm we had survived. Constance whimpered, then laughed, an ugly, reflexive sound. She kept looking at me, like a child hoping I would save her from a lesson she'd refused to learn. Sentencing is a different kind of theater, measured, legal, inevitable. As the judge spoke of restitution and prison terms and a need to protect the community from predators who hide behind bylaws, I watched a woman who had built an empire of fear reduced to a figure of paperwork and fines. They ordered her to pay restitution, to forfeit the properties she'd used as banking shells, and to serve a sentence long enough that the youngest neighbors would remember a time without her shadow. After the sentencing, people came up to me on the courthouse steps, some to thank me, some to hug Zara, some to apologize. Mrs. Lucy pressed a small envelope into my hand. Inside was a key, the key to a community storage locker containing a stack of handwritten apologies from neighbors who'd been cowed by Constance. It was messy and human and utterly necessary. I don't tell myself I'm healed. You don't just put out a house fire and expect the smoke to leave. Some nights, Zara still wakes and calls for a light that's no longer there. But in the daylight, she tugs at my sleeve and wants pancakes, and the world insists on small mercies. On the drive home that evening, Zara fell asleep in the passenger seat, clutching a new teddy bear with 2 bright eyes. I thought of Sarah and the silly bargain lunches over mailbox races and the way grief can be a map rather than a prison. I thought about power, how easily it can be weaponized, and how carefully it must be wielded when reclaimed. Constance went away, but the work didn't end. We rebuilt a house with new boards and nails and a window that looks out on a green, still imperfect yard. The HOA disbanded later that year after federal oversight stepped in. People learned to speak again. And sometimes, on late nights, I read through the court transcripts not for triumph but to remind myself that justice is a process, slow, painful, and utterly human. As for me, I still wear robes to court. They smell of polish and paper and, every now and then, the faintest ghost of smoke. But when Zara laughs and the tire swing creaks with her weight, the sound reverberates through whatever's left of my bones and tells me that some things, love, truth, the stubbornness to stand, survive even the fiercest fires.